Well, the normal answer for the foundations of Western civilization are Greek philosophy, Roman law, and Hebrew religion. But I found the more I think about it, the more I travel in Europe, and the more deeply I go into the Western canon, I see Roman Catholicism as being the expression or the thing that gathered all of these three strands together and created a civilization. I say that as someone who is not a Roman Catholic, but I am so grateful for what the Catholic Church, for all its problems and all its sins and failings, I'm grateful for what it did for Western civilization. I also see that the folkways of the peoples of the Mediterranean and of Northern Europe are also part of our civilization. The meeting of Roman civilization with the Germanic tribes formed a new synthesis that greatly enriched the West. So all these things are part of what makes the West the West. The distinctive achievements are the rule of law and the discovery of the sacred individual and the progressive raising up of the individual in law and society. This is something that is distinctly Western, and I think it's something we have to defend. I also think that the cultural achievements of the West and artistic achievements are among the greatest highlights of our civilization. I'm thinking of the Chartres Cathedral, thinking of Bach's B minor Mass. I'm thinking of the Italian Renaissance, and even closer to our own time, jazz. All of these things are achievements of the West and are things that we rightly celebrate, but they have to be passed on from generation to generation if they're going to be kept alive. We undervalue the importance of free speech and freedom of religion. In the United States, these are guaranteed by the First Amendment to our Constitution. But a Constitution is only a piece of paper, and it will be the strength of freedom of religion and free speech only depend on the willingness of the people to value those things. I fear that we're losing that in our own time. And it's also an undervalued achievement of the West that the history of our own culture and civilization. So many people today seem to think that we are tabula rasa. We just came into this world without any connections, without any past, without any history, and that we can live that way. And they only look at the past as the Western civilization as something shameful or cruel. I think that we rightly focus on what went wrong in the West because this is part of our story too, but we are forgetting the things that went right and the things that made us who we are today. I would say, you're ungrateful. You need to be grateful. This actually happened to me once. I was giving a lecture on Dante, and after the lecture, a young woman stood up in the audience. She looked like a grad student and said, "Sir, why should any of us pay attention to Dante when he came out of a culture that was racist, sexist, the usual?" And I was startled by the question because I myself am not a big reader of poetry, but I had stumbled into Dante and it absolutely changed my life. So I told her that this is part of our heritage and that there is so much wisdom in the past embedded in the great art and literature of the past that if we blind ourselves to it because it doesn't fit our contemporary standards of political correctness, then we're closing ourselves off to a source of wisdom. And I would tell this person that think of it like going to a foreign country. If you go to a foreign city, you can't read the language, you don't understand the script maybe and all the signs. The last thing you would do is to say, these people are therefore stupid and have nothing to teach me. We should see the past that way. The past is a foreign country, but it's one that we should explore with a critical eye, certainly, but also with affection, because it's ours. You know, it's an interesting question because I wonder if other civilizations, people of other civilizations, Chinese, Indian, and so forth, ever asked themselves that question. It is obvious to them why they would want to study their own civilization and the achievements of that civilization. the fact that we ask this question in the West is a factor or a characteristic of Western civilization. We are very self-critical people, and constructively so if we ask in a spirit of love and respect for the past, not uncritical affection toward the past, but that's what we need to have. And because the West itself is a particular and unique way of seeing reality and of investigating reality with science, with literature, with religion, and so forth. We need to avail ourselves of this so we can better understand where we have gone, who we are, and where we might go in the future. Lastly, we should study it because it's ours. You know, why do you study your family's history? Because it's yours. If we want to know the grand narrative of ourselves and our civilization, then we have to know about our art, about our religion, about our philosophy, history, science, and so forth. It's all part of a whole. I think the greatest challenge facing the West right now is whether or not it's going to recover its religion, its Christian religion, and if not, as looks unlikely, if not, how do we keep this thing called Western civilization together in the absence of a shared faith? And not just Western civilization as a whole, but in particular liberal democracy, which depends much more on the Christian religion than I think people quite realize. Another great challenge for the West is whether or not we are going to be able to survive the collapse in the birth rates and the fertility rates at a time of mass emigration. And if we are going to have more immigration into our civilizations, how we can hold on to what makes us distinctly Western while also absorbing immigrants. We've been here before. When the Roman Empire fell, that was a time of great turmoil and great chaos. Eventually, a new civilization, a continuous civilization. It wasn't a recapitulation of Rome, but it was something that took Roman characteristics but added in characteristics from the Germanic tribes and Christianity as preserved by the church. All of these things are things we're going to have to work out in real time. It's going to be painful, but these are immense challenges. We can't just sit back and let history take its course. We make history, or history makes us. You know, I did not read the Odyssey until my own oldest son, who was 12 years old, started reading it in his classical Christian high school. And it opened my eyes to a world that had been denied me, to an inheritance, a cultural patrimony that had been denied me because I'd gone through the normal state high schools. I've seen, as each one of my children has gone through a school like this, I've seen how much it has enriched their understanding, not only of history and of literature, but of who they are and who our family is, believe it or not, because we've read these books together. I see that this is one immense value of the classical Christian high school movement. And it is, weirdly enough, Christian. We're not seeing many classical secular high schools. I'm not quite sure why that is. The classical curriculum also teaches kids old-fashioned logic. This is so valuable in a culture like ours, which is driven by what the philosopher Alasdair MacIntyre calls emotivism, the idea that if I feel it, it must be true. In these classical schools, the kids are taught actually how to think rigorously, which can be really frustrating to me as a father when I'm trying to discipline my kids or tell them don't do this, and they'll say, Dad, that's the ad baculum fallacy, or Dad, that's the so-and-so fallacy. It really can be kind of comic, but I'm so grateful that these kids are learning how to control themselves and how to approach the world with reason, not with passion, but with reason. In the middle of the journey of my life, I was 46 years old. I returned to my hometown in South Louisiana thinking that I was completing a circle. And I found out that things weren't as I had hoped they would be with my family, and I found myself broken and in exile in my own hometown. I got physically quite sick from all the anxiety, went through a spiritual and emotional crisis, and stumbled into Dante Alighieri and the Divine Comedy. Believe it or not, reading the Divine Comedy affected a healing within me. How did Dante do that? He helped me to see myself as an exile and helped me to understand my own role in bringing myself to this point of exile. And he gave me a diagnosis, but also a prescription for how to get better. Dante helped me to see how much moral agency I had in controlling what was around me and my response to the brokenness. And I was healed because of what I learned by reading Dante and the changes that took place within me. I was able to be reconciled with my father just before he died, a blessing that I cannot possibly overstate. So Dante means a lot to me because I never imagined that as a 21st century middle-aged guy living in South Louisiana, that the experiences of a 14th century Tuscan recorded in verse, in this cathedral of verse, would be relevant to me. In fact, it was the only thing that got through to me, the beauty of his poetry. All these truths about the human heart were opaque to me because I had all these defensive mechanisms in place to keep the problems of brokenness in my own heart and soul hidden from myself. But the beauty and the power of Dante's verse pierced that darkness and led me out of the dark wood in a way that nothing else could have done. I wrote a book about it to try to wake up other people who would never pick up the Divine Comedy. Like me, I never thought I was capable of reading it. But in fact, it saved my life.